This is Entheogen. Elevate the conversation. I'm Joe.
I'm Brad.
And I'm Kevin.
Please support Entheogen by making a donation on Patreon. Become a patron for as little as $1. Pledge just $3 or more and get early access to new episodes, plus exclusive patron-only features. Head over to entheogenshow.com and click on support. And thanks again. Welcome to Entheogen. We are very pleased to be joined by a special guest on video, Mitchell Gomez of dancesafe.org. Mitchell, thank you very much for joining us on Entheogen.
Yeah, super happy to be on your guys' podcast.
We're all partaking in the sanctioned substance of caffeine here, I believe, coffee
Cheers.
across the board. So cheers to you guys. Yep.
I got water.
Okay.
Coffee has water in it.
It's 7 o'clock at night where I am,
Coffee's like 99% water.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah,
It's funny. I want to talk to you about that, Mitchell, and get your take on this concept, of just the continuum of substances. I sort of put like food on the same continuum as substances. A lot of people make a distinction between like one substance or another, or like natural substances versus chemical substances or synthesized substances. Caffeine comes from various sources that are naturally occurring. It's extracted and refined and very strong in some cases. And then, you have similar cases with other drugs. Like you could eat fruit that has sugar in it and it's delicious, or you could like extract the sugar from things and have a sugar high. What's your take on this? Because I heard an interview with you where you introduced this concept. I'm not sure if you coined it, of molecular agnosticism.
I did actually coin that.
Equally. Nice.
Yeah.
I like the term.
So the term that was coined by, I actually think it was Dennis McKenna who coined the term pharmacachauvinism. So this idea that like my drugs are okay, but your drugs are like dangerous, scary, and evil, right? And so Dennis coined this term of pharmacachauvinism, and I realized there was no term for the opposite attitude.
Sure.
Right. So there was a term for this idea of like, my drugs are fine, but your drugs are bad, but there was no opposite term. And so molecular agnosticism is what I sort of settled on. It's kind of a mouthful, but that thing, it is what it is. I find the natural artificial distinction to be not super helpful for two reasons. The first is that humans are bipedal primates. We are part of this planet's natural ecosystems, and anything we build, in my mind, is as natural as a beehive or a coral reef or any other structure that's constructed by an animal on this planet. And so I don't think that thinking of us as somehow separate from nature and the things that we create are somehow fundamentally different than natural phenomenon is a useful way of thinking about the ecology and our place within the planet's sort of natural ecosystems. But the second is that it's just not an accurate measurement of risk and reward, right? So people have this idea, natural drugs are fine, synthetic drugs are dangerous. But, one of the most common natural products anywhere in the environment is cyanide. Cyanide is found in a ton of different plants. It's found all over the planet. Very, very small doses of cyanide will kill a human being. And it's totally natural. I mean, it's completely natural substance. And then you have substances like LSD, where we have reports in the medical literature of people who found crystal LSD, thought it was cocaine, and snorted lines of it.
Right.
And we know from at least one of them, from his blood serum levels, that he probably snorted somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000 doses of LSD, and he lived. He did require medical attention. That's actually a really important qualifier.
Yeah,
He did require, I believe, intubation. So there was something going on with his breathing, whether he might have just been holding his breath really, like, I don't know what happens at 7,000 doses of LSD, either internally or pharmacologically, but we know it didn't kill him.
Does anyone here know? Kevin, do you know by any chance what happens at around 7,000?
I was going to say, and I have a bad rep,
Yeah,
I've never gotten that far.
3 to 5 is pretty much like my holy grail.
I know. I personally have spoken to probably dozens of people who've taken between 100 and 300 hits of LSD at a time.
Wow.
That's a thing that people have done on a relatively regular basis. I don't know anyone who's suffered pharmacological issues from doses that high. I'm not recommending it psychologically and behaviorally. There's a lot of, you really want to have a strong person person as a sitter, right? Like if you are physically out of
Physically
control,
strong. Yeah.
you want somebody who's physically strong enough to stop you from hurting yourself. And I'm not saying people should do that. I'm just saying that people do. And we know that it doesn't, result in deaths or hospitalizations. It's a bit of an initiation within LSD distribution networks, this idea of thumbprinting, where you literally stick your thumb into the crystal LSD and then lick it. Those are high doses, right? Visually, you can't see, 20 or 30 hits of LSD is invisible as crystal, right? You can't see 20 or 30 doses. Even 100 is not a ton of powder if you've ever seen crystal acid, I mean, a gram is 10,000 doses. So think about what a gram bag of cocaine looks like. That's 10,000 doses of LSD if that was that baggy. And so, this idea that like, if it's natural, it's safe, and if it's artificial, it's not, is just demonstrably untrue. Like that's just not a true statement about drug risk. And so I think it's really important to message that. Yeah. And so that's part of my issue with these decriminalized nature campaigns. They've been doing a lot of really good work. I'm really, I know a lot of people involved. I'm proud of the gains they've been making. My concern is that it sets up a dichotomy within people's minds that natural drugs are okay and synthetic drugs are not. They also tend to exclude things like cocaine and opium, both of which are naturally, cocaine in particular is a naturally occurring alkaloid within the coca plant. Coca plants have cocaine in them. It's not something that needs to be created from the base of the plant, right? It literally just needs to be taken out of the plant. To make it orally active or to make it smokable, you have to do, or to make it easily orally, you can just chew the plants, right? I mean, people chew the leaves all the time, and that works as well. It's extracted from the plant for sale, but that's really just about prohibition. That's just about making it as strong as possible before you move it across an international border, right? Nobody wants to be smuggling a shipping container full of coca leaves when they can just extract it down into cocaine and then smuggle the cocaine instead.
Yeah.
Without prohibition, I think coca leaves would be tremendously popular. I think you'd get them at Whole Foods, right? We could have fair trade organic coca leaves at Whole Foods. Like it would be wildly overpriced.
If we think coffee is responsible for the sort of like level of productivity in society, can you imagine if people were drinking like coca tea at work?
Sure.
I mean, it's
super common in Peru.
It's super common in Peru, Belize, Brazil. I mean, all throughout, Central and South America, coca tea is it's actually, I have a baggie that's a Nestle brand coca tea. Right? Because international corporations can manufacture something in one country that would be illegal in another. Sure. And so coca tea is made by like major international companies. They just can't sell it in the United States.
Right.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I think the fact that the decriminalized nature campaigns don't want to talk about, poppy straw, they don't want to talk about cocaine, is also a little bit concerning, right? Like if you're going to create the divide, if you're going to create the line in the sand that says natural's okay and synthetic isn't, then let's decriminalize nature, right? Let's legalize cocaine. Let's legalize morphine. Like, let's honestly have a conversation about this, because realistically, I think that if you really want to end opiate deaths in the United States, you could do a lot worse than just blanket legalizing opium. Right? It's hard to smoke enough opium to physically kill yourself. Not impossible, but it's certainly not like, doing IM or IV, synthetic opiates. And so if people are becoming horribly addicted to, we're trying to move away from that addiction language. It's so hard it's so easy to slip into that language. But if people are developing, physiological dependence on synthetic opiates like fentanyl and carfentanil, where, being off by like, a tiny fraction of a milligram is enough to kill you, legalizing opium so that people can just buy it at the store, smoke it at home. It hits the same receptor complexes. It's physiologically much safer. We could literally do it organically, and it's super cheap, right? People have this idea that opiates are really expensive, but they're only expensive because every person moving them is risking the rest of their life in prison. And so they want to get paid. Somebody I know did the math on this once, and if you made sugar producers pay for their externalities, pay for the pollution that they just pump into the Everglades, refined sugar is more expensive to manufacture on a material resource basis than opium is. Wow. Right? Poppies grow in rocky soil with no watering. Northern New Mexico in particular, climatologically, would be perfect. Like we could have massive poppy plantations in New Mexico. and you literally just score the poppy pod and it produces opium. It's a very low impact, very ecologically sort of non-destructive process, whereas making refined sugar is filthy. I mean, it's a really, really dirty process. And so people who say, oh, you can't legalize opium because people would get addicted and they'd be robbing you to get their fix. It's like, we're talking about a fraction of a penny for a day's supply. Like, nobody's robbing anybody for this stuff. I mean, it's, you know, and anybody who lives in the desert Southwest can just do it in their backyard. And, you know,
what
Mitchell,
do you think makes, oh, sorry, Brad, go ahead.
Sorry, Joe. Something you said in there caught my ear that I just wanted to see if you could elaborate on. I'm a big believer in the importance of language, and the words we use matters. Tell me more about moving away from the term addiction versus other ways of talking about it.
Yeah, so within harm reduction, there's been this movement to not reproduce the language that sort of creates a dichotomy between quote unquote recreational drug users and quote unquote addicts. So this is not actually how either biological or psychological dependency works. It's not like there's a switch that flips and now suddenly you've gone from being a recreational drug user to an addict. There's a continuum of substance use. There's a continuum of potential repercussions from that substance use. You know, more and more people are talking about that, you know, there really isn't as much of a difference between physiological and psychological dependence as we used to believe, that a lot of what we think of as physiological dependence is actually psychological, right? Our brains are so much a part of our bodies that teasing that apart is not really useful. And it also just stigmatizes the users, right? I don't want people to think, oh, now I'm an addict, my life is over, I'm going to be addicted. This is my, you know, the 12-step program has this idea that like you have to give up all of your, you have to believe in this higher power that's the only thing that can save you. And it's like, no, this is not how drug use works. If your drug use has become problematic, it's very easy to address it in a practical, you know, harm reduction way, figure out how to reduce the risks of your use, figure out if you want to reduce the use of a substance, you can figure out how to do that in a way that does not always require stopping all use. You know, I know people who had a very serious physiological dependence to heroin for years and years and years, who still occasionally use, and that use no longer impacts their life in the way it used to, right? You know, maybe once or twice a month, they'll get a little bit of some opiate, they'll use it, and that's it. They're working jobs, they're not, you know, out robbing, you know, they're not having any of the behavioral issues they used to have. And so language matters, right? So we shouldn't think of recreational use and addiction as like two separate things. There's just substance use, and there's different risks and different rewards for that use. That doesn't mean that smoking pot is the same thing as doing IV heroin. That doesn't mean that. It just means that it's not a useful framework to think of all IV heroin use as problematic, as addiction. Even the DEA, if you look at the DEA statistics, they no longer release these statistics, but you can look at their old data. And the old data says that somewhere between 70 and 80% of opiate users do not meet the DSM criteria for problematic substance use disorder. So the vast majority of even heroin users don't meet the medical criteria for addiction. They are recreational heroin users. But we don't talk about it that way, right? Because the only people you see as opiate users are that small fraction of users who are having issues with their substance use.
In general, right? There's been very little room for nuance in this.
Sure. Yeah, nuance is hard when that small percentage is so visible. Is the problems
Scary.
are there's
Yeah.
So most people, very terrifying, right? The HIV crisis certainly did not help the stigma against, you know, needle drug use. And part of the reason we don't see it is that even within really heavy drug using populations, opiates are still really stigmatized, right? People who would snort ketamine with a complete stranger off of their cell phone on a dance floor won't tell their, you know, their wife or their best friend that they're using opiates. And so we have this like bubble of users who are just completely invisible in the conversation. And I know this because of doing DanceSafe at events. You know, we do on-site drug checking at lots of events. I've been doing it for many, many years. I have literally never had anyone bring heroin to the booth to test, ever. I've never personally had that happen. We have a handful of chapters where it's happened, but like personally, out of all the time I've been in the booth, literally hundreds of hours of doing drug checking, I've never had anyone bring me opiates. But we know from those, some festivals will have drug amnesty boxes where before security, you can put your drugs into this box and you won't get in trouble for it. And they run drug analysis on those boxes. And I know some of the people who own the companies that do this. And I know that all the time they have prescription opiates, heroin, all the time in the drug amnesty boxes, they have opiates. And at the DanceSafe booth, we never see them. And these are the same parties. So we know
That's
that
taboo, right?
and we're the drug nerds, right? It's not like we're like gonna say anything negative about a person bringing us opiates. Like we're the drug nerds, and like they still won't talk to us about it. So yeah, we just know that it's happening at festivals, but it's super stigmatized. And like, yeah, I do. I want to destigmatize even that type of drug use. Not because I'm encouraging anyone to do it. I've personally lost friends to the opiate crisis, people I care deeply about. They're not drugs I am particularly into. The reason I want to destigmatize it is because the only way to provide public health information, public health services, is if you know what drugs people are taking, you know how they're taking them, if they're willing to talk to you about them, if they're willing to talk to their friends about them. Because opiate overdoses are incredibly scary, but very easy to deal with if there's somebody there who knows how to deal with them and has the proper tools, right? If somebody has Narcan and they're in the tent with you, an opiate overdose is very unlikely to kill you. But because people won't talk to even their best friend about their opiate use, they use alone more often. And because they use alone more often, it creates this feedback cycle where we have more deaths, which further stigmatizes the drug use, which results in more deaths, which stigmatizes, and it's this really negative downward spiral that has now landed us in a point where for our age bracket, for people under the age of 45, opiate deaths are now the leading cause of death in almost every state. More than gun deaths, more than car accidents, more than anything. It's the leading cause of death, I believe, in 46 states or something. And that's horrifying. I mean, that's horrifying. These are very easy to solve problems, and they're killing,
Rachel,
70, 80,000 people.
What's your, how does law enforcement in your experience sort of react to that I mean, I'm sure there's a diverse, reaction, but just in general, what's your experience been with law enforcement on this?
Harm reduction is no longer controversial with law enforcement. It was for a long time. We are now at a place where needle exchanges in many places are funded by taxpayer dollars. So we have taxpayer dollars that are going to give out clean needles to, IV and IM substance users. The police know about the needle exchanges, right? They have to, because of the sort of legal structure of the needle exchange. They have to know that people going in here are allowed to be carrying these things that are ostensibly drug paraphernalia in many states. And so the conversation has really changed. And weirdly, the opiate crisis has changed it even more, particularly around drug checking. Right. So at first, I was really convinced that we would never have an accurate way of testing for fentanyl. It's so powerful. A potentially fatal dose for a non-opiate user might be 1 milligram. So 1/1000th of a gram bag of, if your cocaine is 1/1000th fentanyl, it could kill you. And we heard that people were using these fentanyl urine strips to test their drugs for fentanyl. And I was so deeply skeptical of that being a way of actually getting these positive results that we agreed to do a study and to help fund a study looking at this. So we found a university that had a DEA Schedule I handling license. They're legally able to handle scheduled drugs. Bought a bunch of heroin and fentanyl legally, which is a very bizarre thing. You don't even put in your address. You just put in the DEA license number and it goes to that address, which is how they avoid anyone being able to get their hands on it. I never had a point where I like...
Does the DEA use Bitcoin?
Oh, yeah, definitely not. This was on credit cards. Yeah, heroin on credit card. Very strange situation. Very expensive. These reference samples are fantastically expensive. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times more expensive than it would have been to just like go buy some heroin. And yeah, the strips actually work really, really well. And that study that we did is getting published in a couple weeks. It's in peer review. Other studies have been done that looked at users actually using the strips, and it shows that people who use these strips and get a positive result for fentanyl are more likely to either throw away their drugs, use with a friend, or use less. So all three of those things are things which reduce the risk of a potentially fatal opioid overdose, although overdose isn't really the term, right? It's a misrepresentation death. And now we have in California, needle exchanges are using taxpayer money to buy fentanyl testing strips to give them out at needle exchanges, right? So we now have drug checking being funded ostensibly. It's not direct drug checking services. It's not bring your drugs here and we'll chemically analyze them, which is what we should be doing. But we do have taxpayer money now going to give out what is ostensibly drug paraphernalia in many states.
It's a productive step in the right direction.
It's a huge, huge, huge step. Now, do we occasionally run into cops who are philosophically opposed to harm reduction? Yeah, for sure. Like, for sure that happens. Prohibition itself is an anti-harm reduction model of dealing with drugs. The head of the DEA, I believe it was under either the first or second Bush administration, said in open congressional testimony, the goal of the DEA is to make drug use so dangerous that only a crazy person would do it. Right, so that's a harm maximization policy. That's the policy of the DEA, is to maximize the harm of drug use. They can't say it out loud anymore. And in some ways, that's a positive step, right? When you're embarrassed to explain your position is failing. I am not embarrassed to say that I want to make drug use as safe as possible for those who already engage in it. I am very, very proud to say that. I say it on Fox News. I say it on CNN. And the fact that the enforcement agencies have to intentionally mislead about their goals now, I think is a positive thing, because it means that they're, if not embarrassed, they are at least aware that the political winds have shifted so much that they can no longer say these things. You know, they used to like fly over cocaine plantations and spray, paraquat and other like really powerful industrial herbicides to poison the cocaine supply. They used to take out newspaper ads bragging that they were doing this.
Wow.
They can't do that anymore. And that's great. That's great that they can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But what we really need is a Truth and Reconciliation Commission around the drug war.
Right,
And so that's the direction we have to be heading.
Well, what do you think about like the next phase and the phase after that of transforming the drug war, basically? Or, I mean, is it a matter of like systematically dismantling this apparatus of like enforcement? Because basically the entire thing is founded on this misguided principle of like prohibition, which clearly doesn't work, and all the side effects of that. What do you do with the fact that there are these perverse incentive structures where basically like the cops, broadly speaking, like really need that infrastructure to exist to justify their jobs, basically? So how do you put a wedge in that?
So the police, I don't think, are too much of a problem. There is enough crime that we can justify existing budgets and existing personnel numbers without the drug war. Right?
So
they can actually solve crime. They can solve, we have hundreds of thousands of untested rape kits. Rather than testing bags of cocaine on the side of the road with your shitty ass NIC kits that give false positives, why not actually test all the rape kits that we have instead and use the money for that, right?
So basically making drug enforcement like the lowest priority, as we've seen happen in certain jurisdictions, that can start to shift the structure a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's step one, or a step. I actually do not think decriminalization is enough. Drug misrepresentation, which is what's really causing all these deaths, what DanceSafe spends most of its time doing, that is not solved by decriminalization. In order to solve that problem, what we really need is a legal, regulated drug distribution structure. I don't think it should be done for profit. I think we should definitely require that these be 501c3 or B Corp or government agency processes. But what we need is when you go into the store and you buy 2% milk, you know for sure it's 2% milk, right? Because it's gone through a million regulatory examinations. We know what cows the milk came from, right? You can scan the barcode, and people within the government have the ability to know what store that bottle was sold at, what truck brought it to that store, what bottling plant bottled it, where the cows live, what the cows eat, where the grain was grown, right? They can do all of that, I mean, almost instantaneously. And that's what I'd like to see for drug distribution, is that level of regulation, right? I want QR codes on the back of the fucking acid that you can scan that will tell you the date of manufacturing, location of manufacturing, the number of micrograms per dose, right? Like, that's the level of control that we need.
And who I am. that's
yeah.
Remind me my name again.
Oh yeah. We can do some programming. Yes, I've got some programming for once you're on the LSD. Yeah.
I love the idea of finding the manufacturer, not to arrest them and throw them in jail, but to say like it wasn't strong enough, you know. Or
I have some complaints about this LSD that was manufactured.
Exactly.
Right. I think your distributor has been keeping it too warm. No, I mean, I think that and for drugs like acid, it's you know, it's important but kind of funny because, you know, there are things that get misrepresented as LSD that occasionally kill people, but they're rare, they're uncommon, and they're easy to test for at home, right? So like 2,5-N-bomb is a drug that kills a lot of people. It also literally tastes like battery acid. And so like as soon as you put the hit of acid on your tongue, if you know that LSD is not supposed to taste like you're sucking on a 9-volt, you know that there's something wrong, right? People often describe LSD as tasteless. That's actually not entirely true. There is a very sort of slight bitter taste. It's metallic. It's almost like, right? But it's almost like a memory of a taste. It's somewhere between taste, and it's something that a lot of people don't experience. But people who've used a lot of LSD over their lifetimes start to recognize this like very faint like memory of copper sensation,
like ego cringe.
Ego cringe,
you know,
your brain stem starts to twitch a little bit.
Something knows what's up.
Yeah, right? But this is 2,5-I is not like that. It's not this like faint. It really is an awful, bitter, very strong taste. You know, the DOI and the DOX compounds also have a pretty distinct taste. They're easy to test for at home with just an Ehrlich's reagent, so you can just test at home and see that it's an indole. The drugs like that, drugs like psilocybin, LSD, marijuana, those can actually stay illegal longer without it killing more people because it's easy to mitigate the harms of. The drugs that we should be focusing on legalizing are the drugs that are killing the most people, right? Heroin should be first. That's the drug that we need the control over because it's so intrinsically potentially problematic that as soon as you put it in the hands of the black market, it becomes this like national health crisis, right? Pot was broadly popular and very illegal for a very long time. And the people whose lives were ruined were people who got caught, right? It was the people who went to jail. Those are the lives that were ruined. Opiates, because of their sort of intrinsic potential problems, those are the ones that we need to legalize first. Those are the ones that we need the most control over, the most regulation on.
Is it true that more people die from legally produced opiates than black market opiates?
No, that hasn't been true for a long time.
Okay.
There was a window of time where that was the case. The problem is the solution to that was they cracked down on doctors prescribing opiates, right, which cut off the supply of legally produced opiates. Street heroin is so much cheaper that people switched over to heroin, and that was what directly resulted in the current opiate crisis. What we should have done when that was happening is had a national conversation about why we have so many people using opiates, right? We know that economic despair and childhood trauma, particularly combined, right? When people had really like fucked up childhoods and then they have no sort of chance of escaping their economic and social situations, results in a lot of people using opiates. The solution to that is not to cut down on the legal opiates and then to have these people turn to heroin. The solution to that is to address the economic situations that are resulting in them feeling so hopeless, to fully fund childhood education, childhood health services, to get really, really serious about educating parents about how to raise their children. But we didn't do any of that. We just said, oh, we're going to arrest all the doctors who are quote unquote over-prescribing opiates. Some of them for sure were abusing the system, but even that is just like, the solution to that is not to criminalize that. It's to address the root causes of people feeling so hopeless that they would just rather spend their entire day, you know, really high on opiates.
Another thing you mentioned very quickly in passing amongst a lot of like I'm gonna have to re-listen to.
Yeah,
a
I
lot
do
of
this. I do
'cause
that.
there's just so much to unpack. Like, there's really a lot here, and it's really enlightening just to hear you talk about this so naturally. Like, of course, yet for me, it's just like light bulb, light bulb, light bulb. One of the things you said that I was like, huh, like to extend regulation. And what you're saying is like to full currently illegal drugs, to make them legal would require regulation. And you said they should be nonprofits. I was like, why aren't all pharmaceutical companies nonprofits?
Well, they were. I mean, there was a time in this country when that was a requirement. And when that changed is when our healthcare system really started to collapse. I think it was the late 1970s, I believe.
Yeah.
But there was a time when that was a requirement, when anybody manufacturing drugs in this country had to be a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And we can change it back, right? We can do that. The problem is the lobbyists for the pharmaceutical industry could probably outspend us, what, 10,000 to 1, 100,000 to 1?
Yeah.
Now, money doesn't always win at the end of the day, right? There are times when all of the people with money wanted the legal structure to go one direction, and it went the other direction because of a really broad populist movement to do that. I feel like that gets a little harder every year. Every year, elections get a little more expensive. Every year, people who are running for office need more money. A lot of our old systems seem to be breaking down. Like right now, they seem to be breaking down. One of the systems that needs to break down is privately funded elections, right? There are countries where when you run for office, everybody gets a block of money from the taxpayer to run for office that has to be used on the election. And no more money than that can be used on the election. And they're tiny amounts of money. I mean,
Yeah.
most low, like state level House elections in the United States spend more than presidential elections in some other countries. I mean, it's absolutely absurd.
I live in Spain, and there's literally the presidential campaign is like 1 month before the election. And I would, like, the first time I was here for president, I was like, what the fuck is this? Are you serious? Like, it's like 1 month before, 5 debates, bunch of information, and then everyone votes.
Yeah, so I'm a dual
This is
citizen with
nuts.
Portugal, and Portugal's the same way, right? Where it's like it's a few weeks, a few $100,000, and like you're
Well, and
picking your
Portugal is a
president.
fantastic example because they have really cool progressive drug reform as well.
Yeah, progressive, not progressive enough. I think
yeah.
again we need regulated access, right? In Portugal, opiates are relatively available and relatively inexpensive. Stimulants are wildly expensive, and so you have some of the crime that comes with expensive drugs when people really like stimulants. You also have a lot of people who come from other countries to Portugal and Spain who like cocaine, and they end up switching to smoking crack because cocaine is so expensive in these countries. I mean, just think of the distribution chain from Colombia to Portugal, right? That's a long, physically, it's a long way to move your cocaine, a lot of water, a lot of borders. And so people switch to smoking crack because it's just more bang for your dollar.
Yeah.
And so what we need is, the cocaine store where you can just walk in and buy organic fair trade cocaine, and then that problem sort of goes away. And President Sampaio, the president who pushed for the decriminalization of all drugs in Portugal, has spoken very openly about the fact that they didn't go far enough.
Yeah.
He said it, the way he phrased it, he spoke at the International Harm Reduction Conference. It was in Porto last year, and he was the keynote speaker, and I got to meet him. It was awesome. This president who did the big thing. Yeah, I bought a new custom tailored suit, walked right past presidential security. It's amazing what a nice suit can do.
Nice.
In a country like Portugal where nobody really wants to hurt their politicians, right? That helps too. But yeah, no, I mean, he speaks. Right, yeah. Every people are just it's too busy napping in Portugal. People nap in Portugal like as a part of a national culture. So, but no, he speaks very openly about the fact that full decriminalization is not enough to address the root of these problems. It really isn't. We have the data now. It reduces a lot of the problems, right? We have probably had more people in the United States die from opiates during this conversation that died from opiates last year in Portugal. That's almost certainly true. I'd have to work out how long we've been on the phone and do the math, but like that's almost certainly a true statement. And that's a hell of a statement. I mean, that's really a testament to how much decriminalization can do. They have mobile vans where you can get methadone. So if you are, opioid dependent, they have a way that you can access that. But people on methadone still like heroin sometimes. And so there's still people who are out there looking for heroin. And as long as there's people out there looking for it, it develops a black market. Black markets intrinsically attract the most violent actors because anybody who's not a violent actor is pushed out by those who are. These cartel deaths in the United States and in Mexico are a direct parallel to the Chicago gangs that were shooting each other in the 1960s, or not 1960s, sorry, 1930s, right? Direct parallel. It's the exact same thing. It's you create a black market, there's massive amounts of money, you can't call the police when you have a business dispute. And so we know the solution. When is the last time the head of a craft beer company murdered the head of another craft beer company, right? Like, when's the last time that happened? It's like, well, 1933, right? 1933 is the last, like, that's the last time that happened. So
how is it that we've come so far and haven't learned that lesson yet? I mean, I wonder, like, are there any key takeaways that we can bring to our peers, that our listeners can really like remember top of mind from this conversation, to think, it's one thing to paint a picture of like a cocaine store, and in the drug geek business, we look at that and we see that that's actually not only with a smirk of a funny idea, but actually something that would be almost like symptomatic of a solved problem.
Sure.
But like introducing an idea like that to people who are just very much in their like prohibition mindset even, or who understand the difficulties, but like and maybe thinking about new solutions. It's still hard to envision how we get from here to there and why that would be better. Like, are there key things that we can bring to them?
So part of the reason I'm so vocal about my solutions is I know that they're politically unpalatable, right? I deeply believe them. I truly believe we should open a cocaine store. I also know that it pushes the conversation to have public voices out there saying that, so that we can start moving in the right direction. I recognize that we are unlikely to see cocaine and heroin stores on the streets of American cities in the next like 15 or 20 years. I recognize that is incredibly unlikely. Change also happens fast sometimes, right? The thing that really ended alcohol prohibition wasn't the populist movement to end it. It was the Great Depression. The government simply could not afford to enforce policies that were counterproductive during the Depression. I think it's very likely we're heading into another long economic downturn. I think that's an incredibly likely outcome of not only the first wave of COVID, but if you've looked at the infection data over the last few days, we are now seeing the spike from Memorial Day. In a couple of weeks, we'll be seeing the spike from mass protest movements. I think protests are something that's worth risking COVID for. I've personally been attending Denver protests. I've been doing direct action for, 19 years now. I've been going to protests. I'm not going to stop because of a pandemic. I'll wear my mask. I'll be safe, but like, I'm still going to go. The reality is there's going to be infections from that, right? And we never really shut down hard enough to even stop the first wave. We didn't even really get the classic first wave with a trough. It was really starting to plateau, and now we're seeing Memorial Day, and then we're going to see protests. We may be heading into another 5 to 10 year depression. There's a quote from Game of Thrones, this idea that chaos is a ladder, right? Historically, that is just very, very true. When there are periods of economic stability, you can occasionally move things in the sort of more progressive direction. Can, all right? Not will, can. I think the way to message this to people is really through a constant, relentless campaign that explains that the harms that people associate with drugs are almost always harms created by drug prohibition, right? The anti-drug commercials in this country that our taxes are forcibly extracted to show us, right? They take our money at gunpoint and then use it to propagandize the American people. Those commercials have never been shown to reduce rates of drug use, ever. What they do is frame the conversation. They create a public worldview around substances, that associates the substances themselves with the harms that we are being told, right? People are dying from heroin because heroin is evil. Well, no, people are dying from opiates, not even heroin anymore, right? It's literally not even, a lot of times the heroin it doesn't have any heroin at all now. It's just fentanyl and carfentanil and whatever else happens to be in there. Heroin is not any more intrinsically dangerous than plenty of things we do as a society legally, right? Jag Davies, I don't know if you guys know who Jag is. He was with MAPS for a long time and did stuff with DPA for a long time. He wrote a paper in college. I went to New College with Jag. I've known him since we were, children at college. He wrote a paper looking at the comparative risks of various activities. An hour of driving, how likely is that to result in hospitalization? An hour of horseback riding, an hour of using MDMA, an hour. MDMA use in particular was like not in the top 90% or something. I mean, it was like MDMA use at a proper dose in a proper context is a very, very, very physiologically not dangerous drug.
Oh man, this seems like such a great resource for, what was it I think it was Stealing Fire. The whole last chapter was about hedonic calendaring.
Yeah.
Assessing, your investment in these activities with the risk and reward. This needs an appendix somewhere.
Yeah, but I mean, one of the most dangerous things we do in terms of risk of hospitalization is cheerleading. I think it was number one.
That's why I stopped.
Yeah, sure, same. Yeah, the tumbling gets hard when you. But no, I mean, it's a very dangerous thing to cheerlead. People go to the hospital all the time. I was really hoping he would I really thought the title of the article should have been "Give Me an E." It said that in there somewhere. He said it verbally, but no, it's the risk analysis compared to the legal analysis is just schizophrenic. I mean, it's completely disconnected from reality. If you look at the risks of drug use and how we treat drug use legally, there is virtually no connection there. There's that footage of, he's now the governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, but at the time he was in the House or the Senate, I forget what, I think the House, grilling the head of the DEA, asking her over and over and over again, is marijuana, a Schedule I drug, more or less dangerous than heroin? Another Schedule I drug. Is it more or less dangerous? Over and over and over again. And she sits there, both of them have risks. Both of them are dangerous. Because legally, as part of running the DEA, you cannot say that one Schedule I drug is less dangerous than another, right? That you have to maintain the party line. That is part of your job. All Schedule I drugs are Schedule I drugs. They are equally dangerous. They're equally addictive. And it's everyone knows that that's just complete fucking nonsense, right? Universally, I don't think there's a single anti-drug person in the country today who is out there still saying, unironically, that marijuana is as dangerous as heroin.
Right. Well, what do you think perpetuates this? Is it the gateway drug, mythology, or I mean, it seems like such.
It's a few $100 billion a year.
Yeah.
Right. It's enforcement budgets.
Yeah. It's amazing that hasn't been litigated yet. The fact that you have marijuana being a Schedule I drug with it theoretically no medicinal value, while it's legally a medicine it's almost half the states now, right? It's crazy.
Well, the problem is that medicine to the federal government has gone through FDA approval.
Mm-hmm.
That's all it means. So a state declaring that something is medicine means nothing federally.
Right. I see.
And getting marijuana through the FDA approval process, when the National Institute on Drug Abuse is the one who controls the federal supply of marijuana available for medicine.
Right.
Is very, very hard, right?
Yeah.
You should never put cops in charge of research, period.
Seems like a good rule. Yeah.
You should also never give them legislation power, right? The DEA can emergency schedule. They can literally by fiat declare a drug to be illegal.
Right.
This is a fundamental violation of the separation of powers as written in the Constitution. It's complete nonsense. It should be stripped away from the DEA, top to bottom. But that's a big fight.
Yeah.
Can we go? Oh, sorry, Kev, go ahead.
No, I always wonder, it's almost like, I feel like when it comes to the human being level of sort of, changing people's minds, or at least getting them to consider the other side, it's almost like all the research and stats, whatever, that kind of goes over people's heads in some way. And it's like they need powerful stories of individuals to convince them. However, when it comes to the government side, it's almost like, I almost feel like it's like if we don't frame the conversation in terms of like markets and resource allocation in terms of, if we think about like the potential productivity of a country and the actual productivity, it's like there's a massive gap there, and it's because we lose all these people along the way to dumb things.
Right. What's the economic cost of losing 70,000 young productive taxpayers a year?
Yeah.
Right. And also paying for them to be in jail and not work.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Part of this is the recognition that government doesn't exist. Right? People exist. The government is just made up of its collective people. There is legislative inertia. There's, programs that are running that you have to it's hard to wind them down. But ultimately, there are individuals making these decisions every day. Every day, they are choosing to continue to enforce these systems. I think explaining to the government, I don't think the person who runs the DEA thinks that drug prohibition works, like in any meaningful sense. I don't think most of the DEA agents enforcing prohibition think that it works in any meaningful sense. I think that they are falling into that psychological phenomenon of just enforcing the rules, right? This is a job.
It's a morality issue, right? It's like, it doesn't matter if it works, it's the right thing to do.
Well, there's also an assumption that they're the good guys and the people who use drugs are the bad guys. And so it's just really easy to follow that storyline,
but God knows plenty of them use drugs, right? I mean, if we start steroid testing all of our federal law enforcement officials, we're going to be out of federal law enforcement officials right quick. And I'm not a huge fan of random drug testing for jobs, but if you're allowed to drive a tank, I'm pretty okay with random drug testing. I'm not going to lie on that. No, I mean, I think what we need is a counter propaganda campaign to counter the DEA budget that goes towards quote unquote drug education, right? And part of that is even linguistic. They're very, very good at discussing things in a way that reinforces the existing narrative. The greatest example of that is the fact that they call drug prohibition drug control. Drug prohibition is not drug control. It is the abdication of control of the drugs to criminal black markets. It's literally giving up all of the control. That's what prohibition is. Right. Drug control is QR codes on your acid, right? That's drug control. When you go to a store and buy 3.5% beer, the fact that you can know with enough certainty to literally bet your life on it that it's within 0.2 in either direction, right? Because of the level of regulation over alcohol production in this country, that's drug control. The fact that they have convinced us all to call whatever we're doing drug control is really astonishing. I mean, it's really, I can recognize a well-played game even if I disagree with the person playing it. And they're very, very good at discussing drugs in this way. I mean, they are super professional at this. Anslinger, the first head of the sort of narcotics control board, the architect of the drug war, he recognized from the very, very beginning that this was going to be a war that was going to be won through propaganda, right? It was going to be a war that had to be fought through the public perception of drugs, which is why he, when he found out that Judy Garland was dependent on opiates, she was very quietly, very privately sent to rehab. But when he found out that jazz musicians, African-American Deep South jazz musicians who had a white girlfriend, when he found out those guys were using opiates, I mean, they would send in the first militarized police, right? I mean, these guys who were originally enforcing alcohol prohibition, they had the Gatling guns. And it was like sending in the army, right? I mean, he'd send all he could to throw these guys in jail because he wanted the public perception of drug use to be, it's degenerate, right? He was tying into those racial biases, and it's people who like this degenerate music, and it's African Americans and Hispanics who are getting strung out, and the women now want to have sex with them because they're so hot. Like, he really was very good at this propagandizing. I really want to create a poster that's the same bullshit drug story about like 20 different drugs, because they tend to recycle Anslinger's propaganda. The idea that drugs will make you sexually violent, that they'll make you want to eat people, that they make you not care about your children. There's very specific propaganda that gets reused for different drugs. The guy who was supposedly on bath salts, they claimed he was on APVP, who was like biting a dude's face in Florida, and it turned into like the whole bath salt zombie thing. His toxicology report came back negative. He had no drugs in his system at all, right? But he had very low levels of THC. He'd probably smoked pot like 5 or 6 days before. He was mentally ill. He was somebody who had psychological problems. But man, the follow-up to that story never gets quite as much news as the original story, right?
The problem is like when you like assert the control of the story from such an early time, it's really hard to counter that. I mean, we see the same thing in every level of politics, and I think when you like, it's up to us to come back against that and say, no, you guys don't understand. Drugs can be really good. The drugs can be really helpful. We're on the defensive though. I mean, how do we like assert control of the story again and really really
it's also
fundamentally
the size
counter
of the
that?
country, right? Like I do feel like that a lot. I feel like the only way something like marijuana could happen was that it happened at a state level. It's like the bunker, the ship of the United States is so slow to turn on anything. It's like it takes a local level movement to like, what did Obama call the states? The laboratory of democracy. It takes. Oh, did we lose Mitchell?
Oh yeah, it looks like it.
Let him dial back in.
Let me see here.
Hey, can you guys hear me
Mitchell.
again?
Yeah.
Hey.
Sorry about that. So I actually am tethered through my phone now, using my phone hotspot. So we'll see how that goes.
Okay.
All right, let's try video again.
Perfect.
Which means all of my neighbors are now seeing a hotspot network called DEA Surveillance Fans.
Nice.
I mostly use it at festivals. Well, I mostly use it at festivals, and I like to remind people that they're not alone at the party.
Nice. Good one.
Yeah.
So we should we're getting ready to wrap up soon. I think we're nearing an hour. So let's dive right back into it, and I'll just do a quick hard edit point there. So as we near the hour mark here and we wrap up, Mitchell, I just wanted to ask you two things. Do you have any positive success stories of maybe harm reduction modeling that works, or things we can just really take away from this? And then also anything you wanted to say about DanceSafe and your work with the organization?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I wanted to say is that I think we have a really unique opportunity right now to help push the messaging that the drug war has been one of the primary tools used by law enforcement to target minority communities. Right? If you're really serious about ending police abuse, if you're really serious about replacing of African American and Hispanic communities, you could do a lot worse than ending the drug war. And that doesn't necessarily mean setting up drugstores. I think the step we should be aiming for is of criminal enforcement for personal possession, right? It's those low-level drug offenses that are disproportionately targeted on minority communities. Hari in Chasing the Scream breaks this down really well. Michelle Alexander in The New Jim Crow breaks it down really well, that there are more white people who use drugs in the United States than there are African Americans or Hispanics, but they are far less likely to be arrested. They are far less likely to be charged with felonies after they've been arrested. They're far less likely to be convicted of felonies after they've been charged with felonies. Once a person has a felony conviction, they often can't vote. They can't get And so felony convictions have really been a tool used by law enforcement to over-target communities and really set them up for a sort of permanent economic disadvantage. And so ending the drug war does not end structural racism. It does not end over-policing of minority communities. But it does massively decrease the sort of primary tool they have to target these communities. So we really need to make this part of the Black Lives Matter movement, this idea that the drug war is disproportionately targeting minorities and that ending the drug war can disproportionately benefit them if we do it in the correct way. In terms of success stories, I think the sort of public acceptance of drug checking has been a major sea change in the United States. when DanceSafe first started 20-something years ago, we couldn't even get drug reform organizations to back us because they were convinced that the DEA would use us to target users who were coming to the booth. They would all be arrested, that everyone would go to jail, that it would set the mood. Like, we couldn't even get the big drug reform people to back what we're doing.
Wow.
And now we are in talks with multiple community health clinics, taxpayer-funded community health clinics, about how we can change the law to allow on-site public drop-in drug checking. This is a conversation that's going on in multiple states. I think within the next 2 years, we're probably going to have a location somewhere in the United States where it is perfectly legal for a person with drugs. DanceSafe will be the partner organization being funded by the government to test these people's drugs, and then they take their drugs and they leave. And that's astonishing that we have anyone in the government willing to talk to us about this, right? I mean, we're not there yet, but the fact that anyone's willing to even have the conversation. We're also moving right now on creating a 50-state plan. There's about 25 to 30 states where you could argue that test kits may be considered paraphernalia. Nobody has ever been arrested for just a test kit, but if they find the test kit with the other drugs, the baggies, and a scale, they will give you 3 paraphernalia charges, right? Baggie, scale, and test kit. We've already changed it in Colorado, New Mexico, and Washington, D.C. It was actually 3 different processes in each of those states. So in one, we created what's called a statutory exemption, where basically if you have a test kit, it's still technically illegal, but if you say this is for harm reduction use, they can't convict you of it. In Colorado, we actually removed the test analyze language from the paraphernalia laws. We actually took that out of the law. They are legal in Colorado now to buy, sell, purchase, distribute, legal. In New Mexico, there was a New Mexico reform organization. They actually nuked their paraphernalia laws. There are no more paraphernalia laws in New Mexico. I actually think that's a really clever tactic because it also de facto legalizes safer sorting straws, needles. It's just another bullshit law that we shouldn't have on the books. And so I actually really like that one. That we couldn't do that in Colorado. We didn't have the backing for it. But so we have a grant right now from the Drug Policy Alliance, and we're creating a 50-state plan. And then we're going to seek out the money to implement that 50-state plan. So that our goal is over the next few years to legalize test kits across the board, 50 states. That way they can be sold on Amazon. Right now, if you put them on Amazon, they just pull your account and they keep your money and all those things. We can't take PayPal because they're technically paraphernalia in California. So PayPal is off the table because you can't use PayPal for drug paraphernalia. Even doing it, Colorado was my first time doing direct lobbying. I loved it. I really like convincing politicians to change the law for me. So my whole life, my motto has always been, if you have to break the law, don't get caught. Right. I actually like, if you have to break the law, change the law better. Yeah. It's a bit of a flex. I like flexes. Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, we have retail locations in Colorado that are going to have refrigerated shelving units with DanceSafe test kits in them. We have a chain of family pharmacies in New Mexico that are selling DanceSafe test kits. So you can just go into these pharmacies. They have the empty bottles on the shelf because they have to be refrigerated. But you just grab the empty bottles, take them up to the front, and they'll sell you the test kits at these pharmacies. I mean, that's amazing. That's from 20 years ago when DanceSafe was seen as this radical, really far out there organization to, we should be using taxpayer money to do this, is such a major change. Yeah. But the reality is every nonprofit's goal should be to solve the problem they are trying to address and put themselves out of business, right? That's the goal. Drug checking is an incredibly useful harm reduction mitigation service to deal with criminal black markets being the ones in charge of distributing drugs. But we never know what's coming down the pipe. We never know what new synthetic opiate is going to be the next one to hit market. Before Sasha passed, actually at Burning Man, I asked him, with the current rate of how we're banning drugs, how long will it take? How many drugs do we have right now that exist? How long will it take them to make them all illegal? Wow. And he said, well, ignoring the fact that there's, his notes that he finished before he passed away are being published or may have already been published about his thoughts on future research, right? Nobody's ever messed with the Salvadoran molecule, which is this massive molecule that has lots of replacement places. There's probably hundreds of thousands of drugs we haven't discovered. But he said with just the drugs that we've already discovered, we were talking about a maybe 1,500-year process to ban all of them at the current rate that we're banning drugs. So until we end prohibition, until we legalize drugs and legalize the distribution of drugs, DanceSafe is always going to be playing the same game that law enforcement plays, which is keep up with the underground chemists. It's a game we can't really win. We can only respond. We have to be reflexive and responsive. We can't get out ahead of the problem. So that's where it needs to go. Drug checking alone is never going to solve these problems. And I genuinely believe that. I really, really do believe that we will get there. I think the thing I would leave everyone with is when I was very young, I might have been 12, I went to go see a Holocaust survivor, Alicia Appleman-German, speak at the Holocaust Museum in Florida. She wrote this incredible book called Alicia, My Story. I mean, literally, like, not just Holocaust survivor, like people on trains on their way to death camps, kicking boards off the train so the children could be shoved through the like little gap on the trains, and like running into the Russian forests in the winter, like really survived the Holocaust. And one of the things she said that really stuck with me is that every major social movement looks impossible the day before it happens and inevitable the day after it happens. Right? The idea that women would get the vote the day before is impossible and the day after is inevitable. The idea that we would free the slaves by federal fiat is impossible the day before and inevitable the day after. And I really hope that ending the drug war is one of those things, right? Because from a purely policy analysis perspective, it is clearly the right choice to end the drug war, right? The thing that is stopping us is a well-funded propaganda machine. If people understood the problems that they associate with drugs are created by drug prohibition, everyone's going to be on board to end the drug war. So I'm hopeful that this is going to be one of those things that I get to look back at the end of my life and say, like, look, of course it was inevitable, right? How could we ever? But it does. It often feels impossible beforehand. So that's how I take my solace. I forget who it was. Some old Greek guy in a robe said that, life can only be, or maybe an old French guy in a fancy coat. Some philosopher at some point in history said that, life can, I think it was something along the lines that, the tragedy is that life can only be understood backwards, but can only be lived forwards. Right? And so I'm hopeful that looking backwards, we'll see that this was clearly going to happen. This is clearly the right choice. But there's a lot of ways to get involved. If you're a student, get involved with Students for Sensible Drug Policy. If you're in part of a music community that has a lot of substance use and you're interested in learning to address that, like the DanceSafe training is online. There's obviously no parties happening right now, but we're still recruiting and training volunteers. The Drug Policy Alliance is an incredible organization. They don't have a ton of volunteer opportunities, but if you really want to see the cutting edge of drug policy, you should definitely follow what DPA is up to. If you're a cop, the Law Enforcement Action Partnership is a group of law enforcement speaking out against drug prohibition. LEAP. So they used to be called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Now they're Law Enforcement Action Partnership. So they kept their acronyms in their website, but they got a new name. No matter where you sit within society, there's ways to move the conversation. And I genuinely think one of the most powerful ones is coming out to your parents as somebody who uses drugs. I say coming out, I use that language very intentionally. I've spoken to a lot of people who are part of the gay rights movement, and they're split about whether that's the appropriate language. I have a lot of people who say this is absolutely the same thing, and a lot of people who say this is absolutely not, you should not use it. So I sit in the place that it is the right parallel analysis. It was never illegal in this country to be gay. It was illegal to be caught performing gay sex acts. And they did all the same things. They kicked down doors, they did stings, they did all the same things. If you're in a position to be out as a drug user, it's really powerful to have people out there saying, look, I use drugs, I'm okay, this is a good thing. Just don't get caught with the drugs, right? You can't get caught with the thing.
Right.
But when you have people like Richard Branson and Elon Musk and Bill Gates and, all these people saying, oh, using LSD was this powerful, transformative, amazing experience, it does help. And I really encourage people to do it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think one of the earliest realizations I had when I started smoking pot was I kind of coined this slogan: advertise it, legalize it. Because one thing I noticed was that
Yeah.
before I started smoking pot and hanging out with people who did and hearing about the people who did, I had the same stigma in my mind that this was a very like rare thing. This was a thing that is normal people don't do. And so the more you can
Right.
normalize it, the more you can sort of come out about your drug use, like you said, to your family, to your friends, maybe even to coworkers, if that's appropriate. The more you can counter that, like you said, the propaganda machine that is really perpetuating this whole thing. So advertise it, legalize it, tell everybody that you like to, use heroin or use LSD or whatever it is, and just make it part of the normal conversation. That's a great tip. Great advice.
And for most of human history, this was the norm, right? I think the thought I'd like to leave everyone with is that if you look at human history as a 200,000 year process stretching back to the ravines in Africa where we first evolved as an anatomically modern species, the norm is drugs being integrated in society, not drugs being banned by society. That is broadly the historical norm. Ending drug prohibition is not a radical proposition. Banning drugs was the radical proposition.
Right.
And so what we need is a return to normalcy, a return to integration, and a return to where people can make the decisions about their own minds and bodies. Because ultimately, either we own our own minds and bodies, or we are owned by the government. And I just fundamentally will not be owned. I just, as a human being, refuse that prospect. And so, yeah, what I'd really like is a return to normalcy.
Nice. I think we can all agree on that. Well, Mitchell, it's been great talking to you, and thanks for keeping up this good fight. It's amazing how many fronts there are in this war. Being as one of the good team here who's countering this crazy prohibition that we're going through for the last number of decades, and a return to normalcy is exactly what this world needs. And I'm talking about a return to normalcy going back hundreds of years, probably thousands of years, not a return to like 2 years ago, because that was also pretty abnormal in the grand scheme of things. So thanks for
let me actually show you guys something while I have you. Hold.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, let me show you guys something really, really quickly. Hold on, it'll take 2 seconds.
Cool. Okay.
So these are little clay statues from the shaft tomb culture in Mexico. These are roughly 2,000 years old. You can see these are little mushroom shamans. They're each holding one mushroom and shoving another in his mouth, which I feel with my soul. The double fisting of the mushrooms.
Nice.
And so, these are over 2,000-year-old little effigies of people just like eating mushrooms as a normal integrated part of their society. And that's the historical norm. That's just an undeniable reality.
Yeah, in many ways, I feel like a return to that norm would also unlock a lot of the rest of like the trouble with society. I mean, I think
couldn't agree more.
Really be like a wedge for everything else. So
what we have in this world is not a resource deficit; it's an empathy deficit. And I really think that psychedelics, MDMA in particular, those substances can really teach us how to be a sort of healthier species on this planet, because we really are quite disconnected from the rest of the world right now. Yeah. And high doses of psychedelics are nothing if not internally connecting. So.
Right on. Totally.
Word. Amen.
Amen. Exactly. Yeah.
It was good chatting with you guys.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks,
Mitchell. A pleasure. An absolute pleasure.
Yeah, have a good night.
Listeners, check out dancesafe.org, and thank you again, Mitchell, for everything you do. Much appreciated. Yeah. That was Entheogen. Elevate the conversation. I'm Joe.
I'm Brad.
And I'm Kevin.
Please support Entheogen by making a donation on Patreon. Become a patron for as little as $1. Pledge just $3 or more and get early access to new episodes, plus exclusive patron-only features. Head over to entheogenshow.com and click on support. And thanks again.